We've been working on our representation and inclusion work at Parliament, which has been just started. We have an academic from CSM called Dr. Royce Mahawati, who's come on the team, and he is a cultural historian, and he's leading that work. It's never been done before. I think, so launching Fashion Roundtable for me, what's been interesting having them worked in Parliament is other sectors are really ahead of the curve on this, and yet fashion earns a vast amount more. So for instance, Raffaella, who's here, who's our policy lead, is at meetings regularly with other organisations such as the Incorporated Society of Musicians, which only focuses on classical music, which makes a pittance compared to us. And they are on it about what they want from a Brexit deal or what they want from XYZ, and so are other people. I was speaking to MPs about Brexit, for instance. They would say, oh, so your freedom of movement issues are like opera singers. Yeah, opera, I mean, pop music for this country makes 2.2 billion, right? Westminster makes 2.2 billion from fashion. So where we are now makes the same amount. East London makes the same amount, 1.4 billion GVA, that fishing makes. When you watch the news next and they start talking about Brexit, yesterday they did it, they will do it every week. They will go to a fishing community. We will not be in the news. So I don't think this is acceptable. I didn't realise until we started that there had been no work on representation that had gone to this into what it could do. The APPG was dormant. There was nothing going on. So we're trying to kickstart in our own way, in our own small way, and pick up work that people who forerun, like Caryn, have done. Now, we've got a panel. I'm going to briefly ask you to introduce yourselves, because I think me introducing you just sounds really naff. So if you'd just like to explain who you are, starting with you, Ms. Sahara, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ms. Sahara. I'm originally from Nigeria. Moved to the UK to live my life freely and openly as a woman I am 16 years ago. Modeled, going to beauty pageants, and then also a singer. And now I advocate for trans people and LGBT people in Africa. And hopefully we'll be hosting the first ever UK Trans Awards next year.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then I think you might have to share that with Arif. So.
Hey, I'm Arif, and I'm founder and strategy director of a creative agency called Mud Orange. We just started about 3 months ago. Specifically because I started my career a few years ago at a big network agency, and one of the biggest missing things was exactly this, data, insight into creative work, and I kept on facing the ceiling. So I went from big network to boutique agency to start my own agency to do exactly that, and I work with a variety of brands trying to do more representation, I guess.
Thank you. And then Grace.
Hello, I'm Grace Woodward. I'm I'd say now former stylist. I still dabble, but in a good way. It's not kind of like drugs, but it's not. Fashion, fast fashion, any fashion. Now I'm trying to basically make fashion a better place. You have to change things from the inside. I nearly left fashion a number of times because I didn't know what to do. And then I found Caryn making a space for people like me and all of us, and I couldn't have done it without Caryn existing, and the decades that she did it before any of us did it. So that's, I think, a round of applause for Caryn. Another one, thank you. I'm learning all the time, I'm learning on my feet. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but I'm really, really trying to make fashion the place that damaged me to the point where I thought I'd rather earn nothing than work in this career. I'm sure we'll get on to more of that later.
We will. Thank you, Grace.
Hi, I'm Jermaine Francis, photographer. Work for magazines like ID and Harper's Bazaar, different ranges. More of a portrait photographer, and I do projects. But some of the conversations I'll be having will be related to that, but to other things outside of that as well. I think that's probably best for me to say for now.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kay. I'm an artist. My work is quite a broad spectrum, so I do painting and illustration, and then I also come from a background of textiles design, so I do a lot of textiles, customizations, and workshop facilitation. even though I do a bunch of different things, what kind of like puts my work together is just the narrative that it follows, and it's pretty much centers around like black women and children. I think like initially when I did it, I was just enjoying like my creative process, but I think as the time's kind of gone on, I've kind of realised the importance in my work and how like even with the illustrations that I do, it represents all different kinds of black children. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. And when Clara joins us, we can introduce Clara, but I think we're going to go straight in now. So we've got a series of questions, and I think that will, I mean, they're all really epic. So the first one, and we worked on this very heavily with Caryn, because that was definitely the right thing to do in this conversation. I think the word that really springs out for me here in the bit in bold that you'll see on your agenda is resilience. So when I did the Fabian Women's Network training, we had resilience training because for anybody going into public life and going from the person that's very nervous to put their hand up to being in this position or any of these positions, it's really daunting. And resilience training isn't something that people are given. It's either we have to put on a tough attitude, I know I had to grow up with one, or it's something that we learn. And I just wonder, and I think it actually plays into the first conversation around marginalisation, because I think marginalisation will create situations where through whatever reasons we have to find coping mechanisms and resilience. And I just wanted to bring that into it because I think they're interlinked. Where do you feel we're at today in this very heightened time that we're in? And how do you see possibilities for change? And how are you coping with it? I guess they're big questions, but I think this is a big question event, right? Like, we're in a very polarized time, but we're also in an opportunity for change because there are people, we are not the only people having these conversations. There are people all around the world having these conversations. And I just wondered where you're at with that.
I don't think that there's like one answer. I think luckily for me, I've been able to navigate a space, just the fact that I've kind of had like tunnel vision. And I think like coming from a background where like you find like a lot of our parents, like if you're like a person of colour, a lot of your parents come from like a job that's of service. So like you don't want to say too much or do too much, and you just kind of like keep your head down and get it done, and you get told like not to speak up about, not necessarily not to speak up about things, but you kind of navigate life a bit different. But like now I find myself in a space where like I might challenge things, and even though I don't have the answers, it's like, for instance, if I'm walking and like, no offense, actually, it is what it is. If I'm walking and there's like a white person walking towards me, they just, how they've grown up is that they automatically expect you to kind of like walk out of the way.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it happens every day, and like these are things that we have to deal with, and it's like if every day you're dealing with situations like that, you become a bit resilient, and then you challenge it. So
it's a passive stop and search. It's a passive.
Yeah.
You have to move because I own the space.
Yeah, but a lot of things are passive aggressive, and you find that like sometimes I know if I move out of the way, I'm like, oh, like why did I do that?
Right.
And then there's other times where I'm like, I know what's going to happen. I know they're going to walk into me, but I'd rather that happen. And that's not a solution, but it's a challenge. And then I just feel that like even like diversity and inclusion for me, I feel like it's buzzwords.
Yeah.
And it's like a trend. And even though like now there are brands that are having different people of ethnicities, that's great, but it's like, is it genuine? And unless the real work is being done, that is all a facade. So it's like, okay, cool. I might, for instance, not necessarily me, but someone might be a face of something and it might be put in the center of it, but it's like, okay, cool. The person that's doing their hair and makeup, do they know what they're doing? Because I remember like doing a photo shoot and someone put my lipstick on and they wanted to make my lips smaller. And I'm not a model, so it's like, I was offended, but the fact that like, even though I was offended, I still shrunk myself and was polite. It's a bit of like an uncomfortable situation, and I can only imagine like what someone that does it every day has to go through. And I feel like for people to challenge this like whole like diversity and inclusion stuff, it has to be genuine. So it's like, don't just hire people because they're black and they tick off a box. Hire them because they're talented. Like, I know that if I get hired for something, I want to be hired because, okay, cool, you can see what I'm doing, you can see the talent, and it's not like, okay, cool, she's just in the box, let's get her in. Because what happens is now you're in a space, regardless if you're hired or not, you're in the space, and now you're suffering from imposter syndrome because no one's like affirmed like what you're doing is really good.
Which comes back to resilience.
So yeah,
So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that imposter syndrome, do you think?
I don't even have the answer. I actually don't. I think I just get through. I think, lucky for me, I've always been creative. So then now, like, I'm finding myself in places like this having this conversation. But initially, that wasn't even on my mind. I just wanted to create. And then you find yourself, like, here and now, having to challenge it. But I think, for me, even though I don't have the answers, acknowledging it is just, like, the first step. But I just hope that, like, moving forward, and people are getting hired, they're getting hired not just because, okay, cool, like, they want the I don't know, everything to be, like, diverse. I want people to be hired because they're talented. And that's the first thing that you're seeing. And it's not, because, like, I want to know that I've worked for something and I've deserved it and I've got it. And I don't want to suffer from, like, feeling like I don't belong.
So did you study art at school? Because obviously with what's happened with the education system at the moment, what's happened is what's called STEM education, meaning that arts have been dialed out of the state education.
Well, that's changing now. Because employers have basically said we need kids to basically study art again, in not just to be in art, but for other areas, because we need abstract and diverse
But that hasn't
thinking.
been put into the curriculum.
Yeah, but they're asking for it. It probably
They are asking for it, but my son's at a school where they've added it in as an extra in the state system. So the issue that we're hearing again and again is who's learning art as a normal provision, and therefore who's going to be creative moving forwards if 92% of us are in state education and are not receiving art education. You know, so did you study art at school and then go into what was your pathway into all this?
Okay, so when I did my GCSEs, I really just didn't like writing. So when it came to picking them, I literally picked drama, textiles, fine art, and graphics, all because they were creative. But I never really thought about being an artist. It was just that, like, it was therapy. So then it kind of, like, went on. And then when I did my A-levels, I did photography and I did fine art and I did textiles. And then it goes on, and then you end up doing a degree in textiles. And it's just like a way of life, if that makes sense. But I think now, like, having cuts, I don't think that helps, because it's like everyone likes to put you in a box, and people have different ways to learn. So some people, they might learn, like, just by being physical, and then some people might learn just by listening and being active and just seeing things, and not everyone's so academic. And I just think that, like, whether they change the education system or not, I just think that they should just be a bit more broad in how kids adapt to things and how people learn things, because not everyone's on the same level, and just because you might not get, like, an A in English doesn't mean you're less intelligent.
100% agree with that. Thank you. Right, okay. Let's move this on to... No, that was brilliant. Thank you. Why are you saying sorry?
Female patriarch.
Right. So, describe the landscape when you went into the fashion industry, Jermaine. I would imagine that it was quite marginalising, because I was there.
So when I basically got into the fashion industry, which would have been when I was really young, when I left university, because I studied art photography. I mean, my background, in some ways I was lucky for many different reasons, because I had a mother who basically would have been, she was an academic to some extent. She worked as a nurse, she worked in the public sector, then became a health visitor, and had a father who basically worked in the building trade. And we talk about resilience. One of the first things I was told when I was a child, but you're living in a country that doesn't want you. So you're told that from a very young age as a black child. Basically, you do not have any leeway. You cannot get into any trouble with crime. You're going to have to work twice as hard. And you're going to be... So every decision you'll make has to be sort of thought about from the... So I grew up basically late 80s, 90s. So when the racism that existed then was very much more overt. Let's say, you know, I grew up where Combat 18 had their headquarters, which was the skinhead wing of National Front. So you had these things, you know, I got stopped in when I was driving my mum's car, and one of the questions the police asked, how long have you been in the country for? And I said, all my life, and I live around the corner. Those things are in place at a very early age, that you're making decisions and you know that you cannot make a mistake because you don't have any leeway.
Yeah.
So when I went to university, I obviously probably worked double hard, I doubled down, and I loved what I did. It was a really great course. It was a course that was pretty open as well. And it was a unique course because we were learning the tools that were being taught here. We were taught them at a very young about deconstruction, which is post-structuralist theory, is like basically deconstructing mechanics of dominant culture. So when I came into fashion, I actually started a magazine, Dazed and Confused, at that point, which was a really motley crew. And was exciting because it was, in some ways, all the people who couldn't work for ID or the Face. So you already had a hierarchy, and then you had this group of like people who said, okay, we'll do it on our own, we'll do our own thing. In some ways, you know, a lot of people there were white, middle class, in their background, but there were people who wasn't as well. There was a guy who worked in production called Steve, who was a West Ham fan, who read the Mirror and was quite proudly from West Ham and working class. So it was kind of interesting. As an assistant, I was probably one of the few assistants who were black working in that area. I know I was. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And for me, you know, I was lucky. My auntie was an art teacher, so I had an interest in art from a very young age. My mother was basically of, you know, you have to, if you want to do that, just do it. You can achieve it. So I had this drummed into me at a very, very, very young age. And also I'd been an athlete as well. So I'd had also an experience of traveling to different countries. So I was in a very, very unique position as an experience, especially as a young black child. So, you know, there was also a thing of where I'd assisted for different photographers. And one of the things that you did notice and you did do, and I know that I did, was that I kind of made sure, it was almost like I couldn't make a mistake. Because if I made a mistake, it may well go against me. I don't have many chances. So I have to nail every chance I do. I have to work extra hard. So you're kind of in this process of, you can't make a mistake. You can't afford to.
And how does that affect? I mean, that would affect being creative. That would affect the financial implications. All of it would be affected by those choices.
It depends. I think it also depends on a mindset. I'm pretty stubborn in that kind of way. As I said, my education at university had really helped because I kind of understood the mechanics of marginalisation quite early on. We'd studied, you know, feminist post-structuralist studies. We've done all these things. So I'd had a very, very intense education about what was going on around for me, in some ways to help me negotiate. Even if I didn't consciously understand that, there was some kind of, it was a tool which I used. But yeah, you know, I was dropped into this world which was pretty mental on some shoots. You know, you've got people crying about some Prada shoe didn't turn up, and you're like, wow, fuck, okay, that kind of thing.
Yeah, where's look 27?
Yeah, you know, like, the model doesn't want to wear fur, and you're sort of going, wow, you know, she doesn't want to wear fur. Well, doesn't want to wear fur. It's funny. But then I was lucky in some of the people that I did work for as well. You know, Caryn, you know, I worked for her, and we had a lot of conversations about her experience, about things that, you know, there were some things I didn't agree with her about, because I don't agree with everybody, and I don't expect that to be the case. But it was interesting talking about, you know, as a woman photographing in the 90s and coming through, and some of the problems that she had. But also, the whole thing about, well, of course, you know, a lot of her models were super skinny. And when I asked her about, well, what was that, that was about, she said, well, I was really small and skinny and I was a model, and everybody else was really curvaceous when I was a model. There was the whole curvaceous sexual period, and she goes, well, I was really skinny, and there was a load of my friends were really skinny and, like, awkward, and, I didn't have massive boobs, and, like, there just wasn't like that. So that was her kind of experience that she was trying to talk about, a kind of sense of a representation of femininity. So it was, I was looking those extents, but yet there was, what I have to say, I never experienced, say, what would be classed as overt racism, which is very different to institutional racism. Those, I think, are the mechanics of different things, the unsaid, which I know were there. Now, it may not have affected me directly, but I know that it was going on, and the way that people would think about you as... And also, in this industry, but what we have to understand is that the industry is not autonomous from culture and society. The industry is a reflection or an extension. So some of the things that Caryn was talking about, if you take a sociological point of view. So say, for example, the reality when we talk about women, percentage-wise, the population percentage is more women than men. So actually men are a minority. But when we talk about women, we talk about women as a minority, or we look at women as a minority. So that talks about language and a mindset, and that's in society. So if we're going to also... Fashion imagery is great, and it has a place, but we're going to have to do much deeper-rooted things. You're going to have to change massive narratives. In a way that you'd say, let's talk about... OK, we've talked about Brexit. We could talk about Brexit at many levels, but we could talk about the grand narrative of Britain being an imperialistic culture as opposed to something that is being suggested is very different. Grand narratives about teaching history, the role of women, let's say, for example, the women in science or art. But basically, when we talk about abstract expressionism, we talk about Pollock, we talk about these very much male-dominated positions, and then suddenly you are told that actually abstract expressionism, the first abstract expressionist was a woman. So you've got to get into much deeper-rooted things of institutions and culture and society.
So do you think when you've worked, you've considered that in your casting, you've considered that in conversations? Hi, could we help Clara get into the room? Thank you. The doors are, fire doors and they're a nightmare. Do you think that those conversations have happened around casting and around...
So when I started, I didn't want to, I tried a bit of fashion, and I just don't really care for what they're trying to say. It was interesting, it was a conversation that Caryn and I had talked about, where she said that, oh, hang on, I can't cast the girls that I really want to cast, because now there's a structure of, it has to be the top Russian model, and it has to be on models.com. And so for me, there was no point being a fashion photographer, as say, because I just didn't care. So that's why I became a portrait photographer,
right.
Because the conversations I wanted to have at that point was hang on, there's a whole sort of community of women. Yes.
She's arrived fashionably late, that's all.
Rolling in. Would you like a drink, Clara? Great. Jodie's on it. Thank you for coming. With the best shoes in the room as well. Thank you.
There was what I was thinking about was people like my mother and women that I knew who were doing really important, interesting things in the world, but were not being represented because they were either someone's not cool rich daughter, or they were not in fashion.
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, so hang on, you're talking about having this narrative, talking about female emancipation, and you're not even representing women who do something on the everyday, which I think's really weird. But then, you have to understand also, if we want to be really honest, fashion is a conduit of capitalism. And that's what it is. I hate to, piss on anyone's parade, but that is basically, it is an industry that basically is looking, how are we going to sell as much product to these people, and how do we imagine it to do that? So, you know, it was trying to break through those kind of barriers. And, you know, what I have to say, which is different at the moment, and whether it's tokenism, I don't know. And, you know, the same thing as you're talking about, because we have had black models on the front of magazines of Vogue since the 70s. They have existed, they're there. You have had a black president. So, you know, that tells you a lot about the sense of just having someone on the front of a cover or a woman in a position in a magazine is not enough. You're going to have to go much deeper, rooted and much more concise. But for me, was that was the conversation I wanted to have in the casting. And I think maybe 10 years ago, if I had suggested, oh, I want to photograph someone's mother, because I think she's doing a really interesting thing, working with, you know, animals and stuff like that, and if she's got a lot to say, that would have the email would not have been replied to. They would have said, it's not fashion. And I said, well, yeah, it's not, but it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Whereas now it's like, if you don't say that, they think you're being redundant, and it's when they want that. So it's kind of interesting, it shifts. The reasons for the shift, and let's see where it takes us, is another thing. I think we do get into a position where we think progression is just a given, and I think that's been one of the problems we've had over the past decade, where we just think progression, openness and liberalism is a given. And the positive thing from the turmoil that's happened now is that you are being forced to think about those real changes, and people are, instead of giving lip service, are trying to think about real structural changes.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to actually come to Clara because I think this is really relevant to you, if that's all right. Have you had your tea or gin or whatever it is? Thank you for coming. I know you've had a challenging day today and I really appreciate that. But I just want to know a bit about how long you've been modelling, how that's been going, what it's like going to castings, how you're working, how you got into it, and how you see perception. And because Zebedee are part of the advisory committee, who are the agency you're with, aren't they?
Yes.
And you are as well. And what's really interesting is we talk about the Purple Pound, which Caryn brought up, and Lottie, who edits our newsletter, is an amazing writer and is a disability activist as well. And actually, her backstory is utterly inspiring. She's a scholarship. She then got into Oxford. Then she's writing. And when she started, and she wrote to me when I just was starting Fashion Roundtable, and my gut, like, oh my God, this industry and you. I really worried about her. Actually, she's flying because we are in this shift. We are having, but what has to happen is not lip service. And I think that's where we're all hyper aware, aren't we? I'm loving how these yellows are matching, by the way. Sorry, it's the stylist in me. It feels very neat. How are you? How long have you been modelling for, Clara?
So I've been. Hello, everybody. First of all, hi. I'm Clara Holmes. I've been modelling for 2.5 years now. It was very chance. I was scouted by my agency while going about my business down the road. Since I've been taken on by the agency, I have seen the progression, most definitely, and they have fought tooth and nail to kind of make us be seen and be, part of this shift in the fashion industry. Not all the time is it welcomed. They have had companies where they would say, oh, yeah, and when it comes down to it, they do not hire disabled models or models with disabilities. When it comes to castings, it can be a bit difficult. I've had castings where they know I'm a wheelchair user, but yet there's steps. There is no ramp. And we've had to go to a coffee shop down the road, make sure it was okay for me to have like an impromptu casting in a coffee shop. Now, it's kind of like off-putting. No, I didn't get that job, as you could imagine. I mean, could you imagine having a job interview for your field in a local coffee shop? Mm-hmm. So, in terms of when it comes to castings, I think that casting directors need to think about where they're actually holding the casting. It's all being well, you want to be looking like you're doing something, but then at the same time you're not, because you've not thought about accessibility. You've not not just about ramps, but lighting, sound, hazardous, things that are hazardous to people who may use crutches or have a limited mobility. So, and also sensory as well, because there's as I said, there's lots of people with different disabilities. We're not all the same. It's many different facets. Can it be improved? Hell yes. Should it be improved? Hell yes. But I'm not going to have that put me off from doing something that I've actually dreamed about doing since I was a child. I've always dreamed about being a model. And when my casting agency when they ran after me, and told me what they were doing, I was absolutely amazed and a bit astonished that they would be even interested in me in the first place. But over the past 2.5 years, I've had more and more work. Some of that is probably also down to my own Instagram account as well. I'm not really one to keep going on and on and on, and in terms of, I'm not a moaner. I would rather show you something and kind of do almost like a silent protest. It's like, rather than me shouting, and because let's be honest, when someone shouts at you, no one listens. So I would rather basically do it by images and actually just show you what I can do. I've had many jobs off the back of my Instagram account. But it's a shame that has to happen. It shouldn't be that way. You should have a portfolio. There's jobs come up, there's listings, we be put forward, and we should be able to be accepted for those jobs because we are good for that role. We represent society. We are part of society. Fashion is for all. None of us in here are naked. We all wear it. So why not include us?
So when I first met you, it was in Parliament, and it was the day that Trump came to visit Number 10.
Yeah.
And it was on lockdown, and my phone was buzzing, and I was coming in, and I got in. Some people didn't get in.
I was stuck outside.
You were stuck outside. Then I think we got you in. You were already in.
Yeah,
you
I
had
got in straight away. I just
straight...
went straight to the police officer. I was like, excuse me, love. I'm meant to be in there.
This also talks about how you positively understand. To me, I took that as a positive understanding of my right to be in the room, my right to be...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Look, I can very much articulate my needs, and I have confidence to do so.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to back down. Yeah. But not everybody is so assured, and they need someone like me that's going to actually speak up for them. So
exactly.
And that's me speaking up for them.
Okay. Because I met you outside a fashion show in September.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Clara, I was really shocked at how inaccessible the venue was for you to go to a mainstream fashion show.
Yeah.
It was like, has everyone seen Goodfellas? Do you know that scene where she realised that she's going out with that guy in the mafia, and they take her around the back and they move the table? That was the situation, and it took us 10, 15 minutes of going around the backstage, people walking us through, security.
Yeah.
So if you were going from show to show, how would they facilitate? They need. What do you think's going on there?
Just not thinking.
They're not thinking.
Or is
They're not
it
thinking.
what I learned from Clara, and I want you to tell the story if you will, about the campaign that you did, where it's about the box ticking and about are we moving forwards?
Yeah.
Are we really moving forwards?
Yeah.
Or is it just like, oh, we look like we're moving forwards?
Yes.
And the campaign that you did,
Yes.
which was brilliant, however, they had no actual clothes which were accessible for anybody of a different abled body,
Yes.
right?
And not only that, it also had no models on their actual, basically on their e-commerce set, on their website, that actually represented any of the models that was in the campaign. It's like, well, okay, well, for 6 weeks, we're going to hire this model, we're going to look like we are Bistrotheque, we're going to have curves, we're going to have people of different races, and we're going to have people with different types of disabilities and differences. And when it comes down to it, after that 6 weeks, gone. We are not on the website. It's terrible. And that is the reality of it. some of these campaigns, you see it on TV, and you're like, oh, this is for everybody. And yes, it is for everybody, but why is it only for everybody for 6 weeks? 12 weeks at a push. Why is it only at that point for everybody? After that, it's not. I mean, you look at that and you're like, oh, wow. And it's all over social media and sometimes in the magazines and billboards. You're driving down the road and I saw my face on a billboard. I was like, oh, wow, it's for everybody. But when I went onto the brand's website, it was a certain type of model. There was nobody representing me. There was nobody out there on that on the website that looked anything like me or represented any person from my community, as in the people with disabilities community. None whatsoever. And it's really disappointing. It's like at the moment, it's very trendy. And it's like, it seems to be a trend and it needs to stop being a trend.
How do we stop it being a trend?
This is the question. It takes education and it needs to go like right from the top right down to the bottom. I have never seen a sales assistant using a wheelchair.
No, me neither.
Like a cashier in a supermarket or anything like that. I've seen people with learning disabilities in supermarkets. They do trolleys or they have a part-time job, but I've never seen people with actual physical disabilities where they might be having to use a walker or they're having to use a scooter or a wheelchair, or you just don't find it. And it's like we're not part of society. It's like you're there but you're not there, you're not included. If you're not being seen, then you don't feel included. Yeah. And that has a mental impact on how you feel about yourself as well. Because it's like, okay, I'm not meant to be here because there's no one here actually looks like me. I go to a supermarket, there's no one there. You go to a shopping mall, there's no one there. You go into an office, a majority of the time, there's no one there. If you're fortunate to have a disability, if you have a disability and you're fortunate to still have a job, and that's usually because you've had an accident, they don't want to get rid of you because they're trying to save face, right? Let's be real. But if you're going to go and apply for that job with your walker, with your crutches, all of a sudden they're looking, oh goodness, sick pay. And that's what the issue is. And it's in every part of society. It's like we are something that can be overlooked, something that we're not going to be noticed. But you know what, I'm in bright green, you're going to notice me.
Do you think it's more to do with a stronger implementation of laws?
Yeah.
Forcing those through? Because
good point.
What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, we can educate, and we do educate on loads of different things, but they don't get implemented. And is it more something that we have to enforce those laws, but stronger and much stricter, much more rigid? If you're saying it's about sick pay, things like that, the employees are thinking about.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, 100%. I had a conversation with someone today, and they were saying their private members club it's in a Georgian's building. It hasn't got a lift. It's not accessible because it's Georgian and it's listed, and and I was just like,
that's illegal under the Equality Act 2010.
Thank you, and that's exactly what I said to her. The problem is that the companies are using that as an excuse not to make the changes because the changes cost money, and they use that. And actually, in actual fact, that is, you can actually make those changes. You just choose not to. Yeah. You overlook that clause.
I'm campaigning at the moment for a lift in our local library. I'm back and forth with people who are saying that they want it, but they're finding money for God knows what else in the community, and I'm back and forth with them. If you're using those for public meetings under the Equality Act 2010, it has to have an accessibility, not around the houses. Stairs. A members club cannot exclude you. How do they expect you? What was their answer for how they expected you to become a member of their club?
They didn't have one.
Right. It'd be really interesting to get their details after Clara, and perhaps we could.
Well, this is something that I'm going to take forward. I mean, I was,
to support
definitely.
It's not okay.
Yeah, no.
Right, because we've got lots of people, lots of questions, and I'm going to come back to the second part of our questions. If we could move over to Miss Sahara, and then we're going to go in that way. I think I've gone yellow, red, right, blue. Right, Miss Sahara, would you like to So you're from Nigeria originally. I can imagine that being Miss Sahara in Nigeria would have been nigh on impossible, right?
Yes, it's impossible. The country is steeped in patriarchy, religion, and culture. LGBT people do not exist, and being a trans woman obviously does not exist there. I remember when I told my mom I was taking steps to becoming my true self, she said, "Why women are inferior to men? Why would you want to become a woman?" And I was like, well, my brain has always been a woman. I've always been a woman. I've always felt that way, as in my inherent sense of self.
Yeah.
It's female. Yeah. And it's only when I try to deviate towards what we're feminine, for example, playing with a female toy or presenting as a female, you people beat me up and try to correct me and tell me do this. I have scars all over my body from transphobic attack and, well, call it transphobic now, but when I was there, I didn't know what it was called. But
what
people,
did they call it there?
They saw me as evil, queer, and possessed by evil spirits, taken to church for prayers. It made it worse. I tried to commit suicide twice, and my final turning point was when I was locked up in prison, and I was like, they stripped me naked. Yeah, I was locked up, yes. I was locked up, and it became too much, and I'm not going to go too deep because I get emotional. I don't like talking about it too much. So I said to myself, that's it. I have to either kill myself. The third time I have to be successful, or I have to leave. And luckily enough, there was a missionary, an Italian guy who became my friend, and he was like, "Oh, there are people like you in London, you know, you should go to London." And I was like, "But how? You know, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." And he was like, "Just apply for a school, or a short course or something." And I did. I was lucky because the year I came was the year they stopped giving visas to Nigerians. To Nigerians, because they know the Nigerians come in and they don't go back. So I was lucky. I came in. Became undocumented for 2 years, scrubbing very close to this area. I was driving my car and I came through, and I used to clean a factory not too far from here, a bakery factory, scrubbing the floor.
I know where that is. That's near where Boudica used to have their offices over the next road.
Yeah, it was horrible, but the thought of going back to Nigeria and experiencing the hate and the discrimination and the idea of the life there was more hell than here. For me, the day I came, my friend took me to Soho, and they had Soho Pride. And I saw two men kissing for the first time. And I saw trans women, I saw drag queens, and I was like, wow, this is heaven. All of a sudden, not having papers or not knowing what my future may be, didn't really matter because I felt like I was at home. I felt very much comfortable, and I was like, that's it, I'm not going back. So the fear of not going back made me illegal. Well, as I say, illegal, I was undocumented. For 2 years, and seeing this van saying, go back to your country or go home or you'll be locked up. I remember seeing them in central London. I used to be so scared, and I was worried that I would get deported. So I started modeling. Then I was super, super skinny. When I first came, I was very thin. And somehow, working in the gay scene, I was working as like a glamorous hostess in 12-inch heels in the street of Soho, giving out flyers. And I remember lots of gay designers come in and they go like, oh, would you like to model for me? Or would you like, because they see me in heels, what I do and how I walk and stuff, and they liked that. And I was like, yeah, sure, of course. And I started modeling. It was hard. I got my first cover on Time Out magazine. It was all over the tube. It was a bit surreal because, you know, for someone who came from Nigeria and then having this, you know, having that, my dream come true. Like I've always, just like you, I've always wanted to be a model. I watched on TV and then I'll practice. I see Miss Universe and Miss World. I'm like, oh, I want to compete in the beauty pageants and stuff like that. So yeah, so I went in, I met Tom Ford. Is it Tom Ford? Yes, I met Tom Ford at a hostess, an event in Blenheim Palace where I was one of the hostesses, and he wanted to use me, and I lost that opportunity. And then, because I couldn't travel. And then my manager in Heaven nightclub at the time was also my agent, and he was like, you know what? I have a big picture, they're going to take a picture of you. Then MySpace was a thing, and it was like, oh, Mario Testino saw your pictures on MySpace, and I showed your picture to him, and he said he would like to do a photograph of you, and he's willing to pay you £7,000. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he said, okay, so you have to travel to New York. And I said, well, I don't have papers. And he was like, well, you have to. You need to sort yourself out. So that was the push that helped me, and then came down to Commercial Street here. Then we used to have a thing called Refugee Legal Center. Now it's been cut. We don't have that anymore, unfortunately. They helped me, and I applied for my asylum eventually. I was very scared. So I'm not going to go too deep because it's a very long, complicated story. So from my experience in the fashion industry is that it's very difficult. Being a black transgender woman, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. Yeah. I am, even when it comes to jobs as well, I have a master's degree in digital media, and I can't seem to find a full-time job. After 45 interviews, I haven't been able to get a full-time job, only part-time jobs. And most part-time jobs, I have to do it from home. I think what I think is that we make many people uncomfortable, and people fear what they don't know. And because of the fear, they wonder how they're going to relate to you, on how they're going to talk to you, and how they're going to work with you. So for that reason, they won't want to give you a job. In my case, I think the reason why they won't give me a job is because they Google my name. Working in digital media, when you Google my name, all you see is nasty stories written by Nigerians, because obviously in Nigeria, being in the LGBT stay against the law, and whenever I say something like criticize their 14 years imprisonment of gay people, or attacking a trans person, or locking up people, or a gay person has been killed, or the police misplacing their priorities by going after gay people. And I speak out quite loudly on social media. And for that reason, they always write an article. Like, my mom is in town at the moment. She was telling me how it affects her being at home, seeing people talking about me on television, and how it affects her and her mental health and stuff like that. And I feel sorry for her. I can't keep quiet. She wants me to be quiet. She wants me to live my life quietly and be cis, like any cis woman.
Yeah, what I'm hearing again and again from all of you, and I'm thinking because it's our 2-year anniversary as well, is that what we're all doing in our own way, and actually I think all of the people that have come here on a November night, is that we're breaking boxes.
Yes.
And it's not easy. No. None of this is easy. But these challenges are so important, and that sometimes we have to follow our gut. It's a conversation I know we'll come to with Grace. Yeah. I was a stylist for 20 years. I'm still styling one person because she's really nice. But I haven't gone out touting for 4 years. And I always had a feeling about things. And these feelings are what I based my career on. And I think what you're talking about is, I don't know your mother, but maybe she's not having the same, she's not you, and she's living with the consequences of you breaking down boxes.
She doesn't see
but
that
also
way.
Online is a monster.
Yes.
I've had trolling. It's horrendous. My mother doesn't even know the half of what I've had. So anybody that's experienced this, none of us have had the support because we're breaking down boxes.
I get pictures of people hung on a tree. I get tires when in Nigeria there's a thing called jungle justice where they don't go to court. When you're caught, they will kill you instantly by putting a tire in a petrol and burning your life. I get pictures of those. So breaking boundaries. The Nigerian Minister of Culture got angry because I normally represent Nigeria on the international stage. I go to compete in international beauty pageants for trans women. The reason for that was how I came out openly as a trans woman. I went out and said, you know what, I'm going to Thailand. The pageant is very popular. The media loves it because they see it as bizarre, and the women are so pretty. Oh, they look so they pass. I hate that word. Oh, they look so convincing. So for that reason, they love the pageant because of how bizarre it is. So the media is really into it. So I did a documentary for Sky. And when we went there, I went to compete. I said, that's it, I'm going to represent Nigeria just to piss them off. I always do it to piss them off. I've done many international trans pageants where I only do it just to represent Nigeria. And then the Minister of Nigeria Culture was like, oh, why is he representing us? We didn't pick him, and he shouldn't be doing that, and that was wrong. And I was like, whatever, I'm still going to do it. And I was doing it, and I was calling them out on their discriminative policies and laws and how difficult it is, you know, as a trans child growing up, being taken to church for prayers, for deliverance, because people don't know anything about being trans.
Do you think there is a larger trans community in Nigeria?
Yes, we do. My inbox is filled up on my website. My inbox is filled up with so many messages. And this brings me back to the reason why I studied digital media. Internet has its pitfalls. We have the trolling and all of that, but it has given us so much grace. It has helped us. It has connected us connected to people from all around the world. It has educated us, and also it helps us to speak out. For example, you using your Instagram to show what you can do and how amazing you are as a model. I had to do that because in the UK here, 2017, I was super skinny, and I was like, oh, I'm looking good. I feel good. Let me try all these casting agencies because I've never tried it before. Let me give it a try and see what happens. I went on the street. I can't remember the street where select models are. Yeah, there's a street, there's a row, very close to Warren Street. Yeah, I went there. There are loads of modeling agencies there with my book, my model book, because I've done quite a lot. And all what I've done, I never had an agent, except for that my manager at Heaven Nightclub, but that was a long time, 16 years ago. But now, modern times, I haven't actually had any agent. And I was like, let me try and see if I could get an agent. Went in there, and they all said no to me. Some said I'm too feminine. If I was a non-binary person, they would have picked me. Because I had breasts, they won't pick me. Because I had hips, they won't pick me. Then I was a lot slimmer than now. Now I've given up. I was like, that's it. I'm going to eat my food and I don't care anymore. But in those days, I'm enjoying my food. But in those days, I was like really wanting it so badly. So I did lose the weight. Went there and they still rejected. I went to all the other places, I was rejected. I think some of the casting agents were really stern and very unsympathetic and very like, oh no, you're not what we want. You know, they were so rude as well. The nicest ones were the gay ones. They were sympathetic and they were like, okay, my advice to you is continue doing what you're doing, promoting yourself on social networking sites. And how many followers do you have? I told him, and he was like, yeah, that is a healthy amount, but you need to have more. Continue doing what you're doing and encouraging, getting more people. Then you can come back, then we can represent you. Because it costs us money to invest in new faces. And just because you're trans doesn't mean that we're going to advertise you that way, because you're going to be competing with six models who are like 18, 19, who have been on Vogue, cover of Vogue, and been in Marie Claire. Unfortunately, we cannot have you. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you very much for the advice. So when you were saying that, it just made everything clear, because I felt like this is the new normal. We have to actually be our own agent. We have to represent ourselves as...
I think the role of the agent is, I'm sorry, but I think it's
we have to represent ourselves.
It's a 20th century model.
Yeah, exactly, right? So this brings me back to beauty pageants. I'm just going to brief through this. Competing in pageants, most of the international pageants I went to were in Southeast Asia, where they see black as ugly and evil. And when you have a pale skin, petite, small, no baritone voice, no big shoulders, no big hips, be petite, be small, have a small feet, you are considered beautiful, because that is the colonial mentality. They see it, even in Nigeria as well, that goes on as well, the bleaching and all of that. I think it's because they still see white as pure and as beautiful. So competing in all these pageants and not winning, even though I had the best answer, I'm not being big-headed, but the truth is, I had the best answer. I was in the top 3 and I had the best answer, and I still never win. So I went to Philippines, and when I finally won one, and I was like, wow, I was crying, and people were like, they were shocked at why I was crying. I was crying because I was looking back at all my experiences and trying to win a crown, and I never, ever won a crown because I'm black, and because I'm African, or because I'm either too tall, or because I'm not feminine enough. Because the girls that they crown normally, even in the trans community, are pale, they're tiny. It's a colonial white.
It's still upholding the patriarchal identity of what a woman
Thank
should
you.
look like.
Even in the trans community. So we have pageants where they've never crowned a black person before, like Miss International. They've never crowned a black person before. And I'm like, and it's an international pageant that's been going on for 40 years. And I'm like, wow. So when it comes to trans community, we still have
We've got a long way to
we have a long way to go. We are like far behind from everyone. Yeah, and my experience so far, that has been my experience so far. Let me not talk too much because once I start, I don't stop. So let me give the microphone to someone else.
So with this, I'm not going. I think we have to be authentic, and I don't think I can do. I just don't think it's that kind of a conversation where I just stop you after 2 minutes. It just doesn't feel. It feels really rude. Arif, I want to know a bit about what you've done, because I'm going to come back to you all at the end after, and I know we've got to get to Grace as well. I just want to. I'm really interested because I'm mixed, and my dad's a non-practicing Muslim. And growing up, I dealt with racism on a daily, I don't even know how much basis, where I grew up. But it wasn't about faith. It was about the fact my dad was a Turk. Because I don't think religion came into it. I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and suddenly it switched. I remember the radio going on and somebody moaning on the radio about Far Rockaway and the Muslims, and the local shops, so I was in Brooklyn, were they got their guns out because they were terrified, right? And it suddenly shifted and it became about race. So I lived in Camden when I came back, and the Bangladeshi community are very large there, and there were children bullying tiny Bangladeshi women, and I was like, we can't put up with this. And it suddenly became about faith in a way that, as somebody from that background, I had never experienced. And you're younger than me, so your memory of 9/11 is going to be, how old were you even alive? You were, but you were a kid, right? I can't tell on age anymore. I'm so sorry. I've become one of the old people. So for you, this would have been your norm, right? This kind of faith identity, and that has gone into. So what we've talked about more so far has been about the visible side of the sector, the who's hired, the who is on the catwalk or on in the digital or in the editorial. But you're looking at all of that, aren't you? Because you've worked in advertising. And I just wanted, what you went in, were you you've been rare at every step of the way, and has that made you want to go into your own organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I started in advertising, I was probably the only caramel face and also the only Muslim. And I remember actually the first couple of weeks of me working at a big network agency, everyone thought I was the IT guy. Because naturally you would think they're the brown guy. Sometimes they come with me with some queries that I don't know the answer to, but I'll probably keep away from that because I don't want to feed into the narrative. But yeah, so what kind of had that? So I felt like a double whammy. I was a South Asian guy who's always been presented as the undesirable guy who's ugly and never gets the women in TV shows and is always the evil one. And the Muslim, who's always the villain and evil and this foreign concept that doesn't belong here. And to be honest, it's actually got worse after the referendum.
Yes.
I remember my mum dropping me a text, a couple of days after saying there was lads outside her car not letting her drive. And that's the first time I've ever seen that. And I've ever heard that because I grew up in Elephant and Castle. It's quite diverse there, so it was a really interesting period even now. And I guess my approach to things has always been very unapologetic because I realised I saw other people who looked very similar to me who started to assimilate. I'm going to try and water myself down, dilute myself.
So what does assimilation look like?
It would be, so I'm Muslim, I don't drink, I don't go clubbing, I don't eat pork, and I'm very firm on that. When I joined the firm, I was like, I need a prayer room, and I want halal meat, and if you're not going to sort that, I'm amazing, you've got to sort me out somehow. Mm-hmm. And I was very confident in that, and that was probably artificially generated because I knew I had to compensate because on Friday night when they go out for drinks and on Monday morning when they talk about it, I can't share those experiences. So I had to compensate on, uber confidence in other areas. And I realised very quickly that I needed to push the boundaries. So when I was at a big network agency, I went to the new business department because I'm a strategist. So I work with brands to figure out what do you do with your next clothing line or what do you do with your next product. But there was no data, nothing out there for me to say, let's talk to a Muslim audience, let's talk to a brown audience, let's talk to a South Asian audience. So I demanded money, and I'm not an activist, but the way I did it is I spoke to them in their own language, and I spoke in the terms of money. And then I moved on to, and I wrote a report called Modest Fashion, the industry's best kept secret. And I looked at, because I worked with a variety of fashion brands, and I knew for me to upsell to them, I needed to speak in terms of money. And so I wasn't an activist, I was just a businessman. And I said, if you do this, your bottom line, the result will be this. And if I could get them to do that, and then for them to see the results, then I can probably feed in that representation. And so I went kind of through the back door, rather than saying, let's do better for society. I was saying, do better for yourself. And by doing better for yourself, I get the result I want, you get the result you want, and then we can move forward together. And at my last agency that I worked at, they were really great. I walked in there, they had a prayer room ready for me. On my birthdays, they got mocktails and KFC. That was all halal certified. And I was like, yeah, this is amazing, because I'm a KFC kind of guy. Yeah, this isn't sponsored, by the way. Yeah. But then one thing I realized as well is I was doing all of this, and I was being dangled as a carrot for client work to win business. And then once it comes in, bang, Arif's nowhere to be seen. And so then I realized, okay, cool, I'm a very talented guy. I've got very talented friends. I can do this on my own. I don't need anyone to approve me. You know, my work speaks for itself. And so I connected with 2 other Muslims, Alauddin, who's a creative director, and Rasha, who's a producer. And I said, let's go tear it up. Let's join forces and let's make magic. And now we've got 9 accounts in the space of 3 months.
Wow.
Well, project-based, not retainer. Gosh, imagine that. And
drinks orange juice would be on me. I don't drink either.
But then it like really pushing the narrative and selling. Like, it's really interesting. Like, for one of a luxury fashion brand, we've signed off a Down syndrome lead model. Who's Asian, South Asian, and for me, like, that makes me so proud. And something that I write a lot about is I've never seen someone look like me, look as a sexy protagonist in an ad, in a movie entertainment. I've always been the ugly one. And like in Venom, when Riz Ahmed was the bad guy, I was supporting the bad guy because I was like, that's me. And I've never seen a good-looking guy who I could be proud of because I was one the ugly one.
One of the most moving conversations I've heard around representation and why we've used the word representation for the work we're doing in Parliament was the talk he did in Parliament for Channel 4 about representation and not diversity. It had me in tears, because it was so moving the way he spoke about tick boxes and being passive and how we need to be active. And it really challenges, because you're right, if you're cast as the taxi driver or the terrorist and that's all that anybody sees, then it's flawed expectations. So how have the business community... So obviously you're going in, you seem very dynamic. This is the first time I've met you, but I definitely am very excited, and I definitely want to hit you with our work. But because you're talking about value, and this is the language, because is that where they're coming from, or how are you framing it to them?
So I generally go in, so like an example, and I probably want to name any names, is the month of Ramadan, which I'm sure everyone knows about, when supermarket brands communicate to the Muslim audience.
Yes.
They're not talking to me, they're talking to an immigrant.
Yes.
Where you walk down the Ramadan aisle.
Eid Mubarak.
And it's Eid Mubarak, and it's the 30 kg rice bags, which I have no idea what to do with.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't make any sense when in the 2011 census, 50% of Muslims were under 25. And what that means now, we don't necessarily know, but what we can assume is it's 2nd and 3rd generation Muslims, and you're giving them 20 kg flour. It doesn't make any sense.
They're not living in that extended family
Exactly,
narrative,
yeah.
right?
And so what they're perceiving Muslims to be and Asians to be are the foreign immigrants.
Right.
So
Interesting.
And what I generally do is take in all of their previous work and rip it apart and
I
say,
love
there's this money that you could be going for, but you're hitting over here.
You're
to
hitting
hit
grandma
bullseye.
and not me, right?
Exactly, and then I do the strategy, and then Ala does the creative, and then we could. But essentially, it comes down to money, and I'm probably a bit different here because I'm not very active in the activist sense.
Are you a capitalist?
Not necessarily. I can't afford to be.
When it suits you.
But
We all probably are.
But I would say when I do speak to some of the biggest businesses in the UK, when I do kind of go on a worthy lens of saying you should be doing this, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, the moral second.
It's not about the shoulds, because it's like, well, you know, we should be doing loads of things. And I like to position it in a way it's like, you can't afford not to do this for the survival of
Yeah,
you
I mean,
tomorrow.
don't think Vogue has put anyone of colour on their cover because they think it's a good idea. It's because they're not selling any magazines anymore.
Exactly that, yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, so recently I was looking at the demographic in the UK, the people who vote and the people who are in this country. I can understand why most companies and businesses don't want to hire ethnic minority people and also people of maybe diverse sexuality and genders. I think it's because 55 million white people live in this country and there are only 15 million of us. So they would rather divert their businesses and go to the majority instead of the minority, which is very sad.
But it breaks down in different demographics. My understanding is that London's 33%
Yes.
mixed.
Yes.
Out of London, it's different, obviously different. You're from Birmingham, right?
Yeah, I mean...
It's different in different
different
areas.
I mean, where I come from, there were 4 black families.
Yeah.
And that was it. There were more Asian families where I came from.
Yeah.
Where I came from, black families. So you have to be careful in the sense of where you think about the demographic. London isn't... You could argue London isn't really the rest of the country to some extent, to be honest.
Living in Hitchin, I can very much verify.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So my uncle had a hairdressing salon in Hitchin, and when my father and 2 of his brothers came here from Turkey, they were called Salatin, Hassan and Suleiman, and they had to become French because that was obviously what a foreign hairdresser was in the 1960s. So Hassan became Andre, and Andre had a salon in Hitchin for years. My cousin Tanner still lives there, but they were like the only Turks in a market town in Hertfordshire. So
I have seen the name changing thing. I had to, when I first came, I had an African name and I had to change it because after doing
Tell
my...
us where your African name is.
No, because no, it's my old name.
this is
The thing is, when I apply for jobs, I don't get called in for an interview. When I changed my legal names into a more Western German English name, I started getting interviews. I started getting called in for interviews. So that's quite common, I think.
And I think that's where Arif's story is actually is an empowerment story, because statistically people with Muslim names now are not getting hired. And I have a Muslim surname. I'm now running my own business, and there are reasons why people are either unemployed or starting their own businesses.
But that has been the history of the immigrant.
It has, but I
mean,
think it's heightened at the moment.
No, I agree it's heightened, but we also have to remember, and that's why I'm going back, you have to look at the sociological and historical positioning of it. The history of the immigrant has always been about changing the name.
No, it's true. It's true.
I think what's happened at the moment, and this is why I think when people talk about progression, and a lot of theorists talk about this, that progression is seen as something that happens all the time.
No,
or it's not.
Yeah.
That's actually a humanist construct. Progression happens, and then it goes back. So what we're seeing now is another sense of heightened tension of things that are going on, of nationalism and things like that. And, at some point, there will be this element of progression. And then we'll probably head back to there again. The things that you're talking about is what, exactly what my parents would have gone through, and when they came over from Jamaica, and then you had what was called the lost generation, which was my uncle's generation who basically, they just dropped out of society, which they took on Rastafarianism and they disappeared. And then we had the race riots and stuff like that. And, you know, when Trevor McDonald was on TV would be turned on. God, Trevor McDonald's on, because he was the only, you know, he's a black newsreader. You know, so when you look back at the mechanics of stuff, there's always a weird repeat, if that makes sense. And I think that's why what I said before was we got into this kind of like almost expectation that this was just a given, the status quo. Yeah. And actually what's happened, everyone's woken up and said, oh, actually, it's not the status quo. Women still get paid less. There's people of ethnic minorities going through different, of the same things, different things. So, yeah.
I think have to fight back.
It's a very interesting era. I do get hope. I mean, I'm an optimist and a pessimist in the same person. But we have the impeachment trial, and we have hope. I do look at the current leaderships of lots of parties and not feel hope, but I know women who are standing who are really empowered, and I admire their bravery for standing in the current election. You know, for the first time, so many candidates. There's the first Ghanaian candidate in Thamesmead and Arif Miah, who I think is fantastic. There are women I know through the mentoring, because I've broken out of my fashion world, and they are really exciting. Before we go back to us again, I'm going to go to Grace, because what I think is really interesting about you is it's really something, I call it the Kool-Aid. You've either drunk the Kool-Aid or you haven't. And, you know, you can have success and you can have it all, and then you can drink the Kool-Aid and you can go, this isn't good enough. And I look at you as someone, you were styling, you were on TV, you were making your money, paying your tax, wearing the clothes, and you've had a kid and you've gone, no, this isn't working. This whole system isn't working. And you've kind of gone off on one. And what does that look and feel like?
I mean, I think I'm mostly here to apologise for the fashion industry. That's what I feel like, actually, is that I need to do. Because I think, talk about imposter syndrome, you know, who needs another middle-class white woman on a panel like this? Caryn's right. You know, I feel like I shouldn't be here, but I'm here because I want to stand up and go, I was a part of the system, and only because actually like Jermaine said earlier, I wasn't somebody rich's daughter that was, you know, like thin and pretty. Fashion for me was a coping mechanism of two drug addict parents, both from working class backgrounds, that I was like, oh, I think I've seen a way that I can cheat the system. Hold on, I'm being told something.
No. Hold it closer.
I feel like I found the sort of thing, and at a time when stylists weren't really, people didn't really know what stylists were. You know, Judy Blame, Jane Howe, those kind of brilliant mavericks were doing things, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was just creative and a girl. And I was like, which felt like a massive burden, actually, and a curse at the time. And I was like, okay, I need to find out what I can do with this. And clothes became a thing, a coping mechanism. And as I went further and further into the industry, I just wanted to succeed. This is in the background. My mum was dying of an eating disorder, caused by when I found her basically on her deathbed. She was like, all I wanted to look like was Twiggy. And I suddenly was like, oh my fucking God, what have I been doing this whole time?
You've chosen the drug.
And it's sort of, you know, and I just kind of realised, but then my whole universe came crashing down on me. I had a kid, and actually having a child in the fashion industry is basically the end of your career. If you're not sort of self-sufficient or, you know, basically self-funded. And I just kind of realised I had a child late. I had to, because I knew my career would be over if I had a child. So I had a child at 37. My mum died 8 weeks later. And that's when, like, the crunch came. Not just for me personally, but I just realised how stacked the cards are stacked against anybody who isn't white and privileged. which coming from white privileged female sounds odd. But I just kind of realised at that time, I was down, and when you're down, it's very, very hard to get back up, because I suddenly realised that I was other. I suddenly become other. And I realised that I had to do something about it. Like you were saying, that, you know, when you've either got to, like, kill yourself. I either was like, I've got to just basically abandon shit or keep fighting. And it took me a number of attempts, you know, and of having, you know, a number of nervous breakdowns, of being like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. You know, it took me a couple of years to recover my mental health from my mum dying. You know, she was dying for like 10 years. She was killing herself for 10 years, and living with that in the background of trying to have a career was a lot of mental hoops to jump through. So I don't really know what to do, but the more that I speak up, the more that I find people like Fashion Roundtable, because I thought I was out there by myself for a long time. Obviously, that one woman in the face of the juggernaut of a multi-billion-pound industry is not going to have that much of an impact. However, talking about things becoming law is going to make an impact. You know, I didn't realise that I think Caryn may have noted me this term first as a feminabler as the patriarchy, which horrified me. I died a million deaths hearing that, and I was like, but it was true. But I was trying to survive in an industry which only allows you to be that.
You have to be, there's an element of sexual availability going on, because there's also a power and a financial imbalance, because if most photographers are male and most stylists are female, and photographers, sorry Jermaine, but they're earning 7 times what the stylist and probably 10 or 12 times what the hair and makeup are earning, then there's an imbalance. And it became, I lost every single client bar one when I was pregnant. I was in labour working, I was back out working the week after. I lost the weight in 2 months. So I relate, because I had to make it was the whole psychology of it is so warped, and then trying to justify the childcare costs on a freelance economy, so I get it.
So now I face the tumbleweed of talking against an industry, basically who I kind of deduced, it's not rocket science, don't really like women. So it's an industry that serves women to destabilise them, to sell them stuff that they don't really need, to make themselves feel better about themselves, about feeling bad about themselves, that the industry caused in the first place. So I've started a project which hopefully might have I've dedicated my life now, and had to completely sacrifice any earnings, and this is what we come down to about talking about capitalism and how you serve stuff up and speaking the right language to people, and how we move forwards in fashion in a way of inclusion. So I do a small brand. It's the only fashion I will do now, because I will not earn from an industry that I can't bear. And trying to be sustainable. The first thing that put me off fashion was I was actually so bamboozled by the sort of misogyny in fashion that I didn't even realise what was happening. What I realised what was happening is fashion is one of the most polluting industries in the world. That was the basis of when I just suddenly went, hang on, I can't, it's not in my name. I can't sleep at night. This is disgusting. And this was 10 years ago. This was at the peak of my TV career. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing?
So what if Arif came? Because I'd quite like to work with Arif. I might get my prop kit out again if and we're working on something that is representative and inclusive. What happens if we actually take the bull by the horns and say, this is the work that we want to work on? Maybe we come out of retirement for that, or do you think you're done with it?
Well, as I said, I do Kitty Joseph, which is what I'm wearing tonight. I've learned a lot about inclusion, about being on these panels, because actually you don't learn about it in any other way except for showing up on cold nights in November, not being paid to learn about shit. You have to be, and most people don't want to do that. They're quite happy in their fashion careers being paid, enough amount.
I don't know, you see, I watch it from a different perspective, and I watch people going around in circles, and there's less money, and they're still trying to do the same thing that's not working. So I see it slightly differently, and that's why I think actually Arif is I'm really glad that Caryn suggested we had Arif, because I think there are opportunities for a different story. Because, somebody who's part of Fashion Roundtable is Sarah Ali. She went to Westfield and said, you're missing a trick with Ramazan. We call it in Turkey, it's Ramazan.
But again, so that's
there's so much money.
If you're signed up to capitalism, if that's your model, then
but fashion
bingo,
is capitalism, isn't it?
It's like, I don't know, we were messaging, and I'm like, suddenly somebody went, hang on a second, we're missing this brown pound out there. Fashion was like, it's like they suddenly went ka-ching. Oh, this isn't a problem anymore because these people want to spend money. So that's fine. But if you're trying to do something else, if you're trying to say to any brands, which to be inclusive, you have to sacrifice some profit. So we've just done a campaign where to represent inclusion, you have to have all of the people there. So we had to book 3 models. And even then, you're not really representing, but even to take those steps. So the investment is kind of huge in the sort of the time and the sampling and stuff like that, which brands are not yet prepared to do if you're looking at a capitalist model.
But you're looking at it as though it's the triangle, as though it's the pyramid of economy of scale, and what the other part of that conversation, which is other work that we're working on, is how do you recalibrate fashion so that it's about paying everybody fairly and it's not necessarily about a high 1 billion turnover profit margin. That's something else. We are also working on that because I like working, and we've had 2 meetings with Extinction Rebellion about and people from the industry, including Burberry and lots of different brands, and that's something else. And if anyone wants to come to any of those meetings, speak to Jodie or Rafaela. What I'd really like to do, because I realise we've run a bit over, but I think I just wanted to give everyone space because these are big topics and you can't run to time and be neat and tidy. I want to talk about takeaways, and I want to come to UK. And what would be takeaways? What can we do? Because these are big questions. I certainly don't have the answers. And I also just want to make you aware that we need a lot more data for the survey that we're working on so that Royce and Rafaela can create the right kind of paper that represents. We need you to speak to 10 people and ask them to take the survey. It only takes 5 minutes. You've got the QR there, you've got cards. And just to keep us going as well, we've started up a membership which started on my birthday last Thursday. And it would be great if you could let people know about that. I completely understand if it's not for you right now, but it'd be really great if you could tell some people. And I also want to buy this. Sorry, I've been completely swayed by this. How do we illustrate change? What does change look like to you?
It's quite broad. I think first is like questioning your intentions. I think the answer, you kind of know it like intuitively yourself if you question why you're doing what you're doing. And what we was talking about in terms of like tokenism and ticking off boxes, it starts like from the ground up. So it's like, again, you don't want to just hire someone because they're ticking off a box, hire them because they're talented, but also when you are hiring people because they're talented, you want them to shine and feel comfortable in their environment. So if you're hiring a model to do their thing, you want them to feel comfortable, you want them to have what they need to shine rather than...
I'd just counter that because there's been talk in the Labour Party about diversity, all shortlists. There were all women shortlists. You wouldn't want to be part of that kind of... You would want to be booked based on talent rather than a shortlist. How would that... I'm just wondering, because the all-women shortlist arguably worked to get more women into Parliament, because otherwise it was just going to be more white men in blue suits. But how would you... Can you see where I'm going with that? Because getting there on talent alone sometimes isn't going to be enough.
But the thing is like, who's to say that a diverse background doesn't have talent? Like, is the people like working from the ground up doing their work to like scout people with talent? So it's like there's talented people everywhere, whether they're black, they're white, they're women, they're men. There's talent. So I think for someone to just hire men, that's just lazy. And for you to just hire someone because of the colour of their skin and because they tick a box, that's also very lazy. So it's like, it's not my job to do the person's work for them, to scout people. People are getting paid to do that job. So it's like, if you're scouting people, you have the internet, you have Instagram, you have Twitter, you have all these things where people are happily
Has
to just...
Instagram been a good tool for you, for your business?
For me, yeah, it has. But again, like, I've never, any job that I've got, that I've had, is because I've been kind of like scouted to do it. I've never, any job I've applied for, I've never received. It's because I've kind of put myself out there. But also it's like, are you going to events to scout people? Or regardless of the spectrum, regardless if they're a model or artist or photographer, are you showing up to places to see these people? If you're relying on the internet alone, that's not going to work. If you just go into places alone, that's not going to work. So I think, again, like, to just hire men, that's lazy. To just hire someone to tick off a box, that's lazy. There's a bigger picture.
There's a middle way.
There's a middle way, but even if I had that answer, you have to pay me for that answer. Because people are getting paid big money to, like, imagine, like, someone's doing a job, and then they're supposed to do the scouting themselves, and then they reach out to you to give them your contacts. And it's like, that's all good, that's all well and good, like giving people opportunity. But someone's just taking what you've given and running with it. And it's like, everyone just has to, like, I don't know, find the energy to do the work. And I can talk all day long, but there are people in positions that maybe they shouldn't be in those positions. Maybe you should hire people with things to say, or maybe you should hire people that are happily sharing their stuff online. It's not that hard to scout someone. So again, it's lazy. It's laziness.
I agree with what Labour is doing, and I feel that in society at the moment we need that quota. It's easy to say that, you know, pick people based on talent. Unfortunately, even if you are talented and overtly talented, you're still not getting the job because of the color of your skin or because of your gender or because of your sexuality. So I think having that quota is important, meaning that there are so many talented of us in the LGBT, I'm speaking for myself now, in the LGBT community and also in the black community, but we don't get that chance to show our talent. We're not given the opportunity to express ourselves creatively. So that space, creating that quota, is important. As much as it may not solve the whole issue, I think it's important to have that opportunity at least to give a portion of people in the society to be represented, especially in the political system, for example, in Labour Party. We need more diverse voices.
And I wanted to ask you, have you got a Muslim female on your board of directors? Excellent. Because you didn't mention her in your partners. Oh, sorry. Thank you for clarifying it. I'm just getting all like uppity.
Okay. Anyone else want to come in on this point?
Can I say one other thing about education? For me, I think the way we can change the world is education. Nelson Mandela said that the biggest weapon that we can use to change the world is education. Most people are not, if they knew about what being in the LGBT or being black or being underprivileged feels like, they won't act the way they act. For example, climate change, for example. Many people use the kind of things like being over materialistic or being over capitalistic. If they know more about the devastation caused by climate change, people would change. Although I have to say that during the debate a few days ago between Corbyn and Boris, when Corbyn brought about climate change affects the poorest country, the Tories were laughing and screaming. I'm sorry if you're Tory, but I think that was very inhumane. I'm very sad to watch because we're in a society where we have no compassion. We're focused on how much we can make and how comfortable we are. We don't care about how other people feel. So education is very important. We need to teach people and show people. And the only way we can show people is by inclusion and by giving those people a chance to speak, give them a chance at the table. For example, all the faux pas that we see in businesses and in companies, when you have them promoting bleaching cream in Dove, for example, or making decisions where that is inherently racist, they won't be doing that if we have a black person on the board team, or if you have a trans person on the board team. You will not misgender a trans person. You will not dead name a trans person. We need inclusion, and we should be open-minded. Also, in my community, the black community, I am battling, and I think I'm the only one. They call me a sellout for calling them out on it, because the black community do not accept LGBT people. The number of trans people that are murdered in America are murdered by black people, and we don't say that. People are afraid to say it. So we need more education, and we need to teach our people as well that we are normal, we are human, we have the same blood running in our veins. We just need a chance for us to educate you and show you that we are one of you, So that is a very important point I wanted to put out there.
Can I add to that as well?
Sure.
I think what you're saying, that's so true, and like being educated is so important in terms of like being exposed to things as well, because I find that like you don't know if certain opportunities exist if you've never seen it, and you don't know if it's tangible. And when you do find that it's tangible, you've got so much groundwork to do just to get where someone's already at. And you might find that someone has a privilege because their parents know of it. Or even like when I went to CSM, I didn't know what CSM was until I applied for it. And that's only because my tutor was a privileged white woman who put me on. But if that was the case, if I had to apply for it, I wouldn't know. And I find that like you can't access certain things if it's not even shown to you.
Yes.
Like I had a job like which lasted like 2 weeks, and it was working in an art club, like for children, and we had to do like Facebook ads. And in the Facebook ad, you had like the radius of the area you're supposed to go to. And when I was doing the Facebook ad, they were like, "Oh, like don't make it too south of the river," and like stuff like that kind of hurts me, because it's like there are children that aren't even like having access to this because you've just taken it away before you've even promoted it. And I get that like every business has their target audience, and their target audience were like wealthy kids, I assume, that live in Chelsea. I get it, it's a business, but at the same time, it's like if that's one art club, it's like imagine how many places are depriving people access. So it's like, one, you don't have people higher up doing the work to hire people or to scout people. Two, you don't have access to it. You don't even know it exists to even apply for it. So it's like there's so much work that needs to be done on
Joining the dots.
Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Otherwise, I'm going to pick on someone. Okay, Charlotte's got a question here.
I just wondered, I didn't completely understand, Grace, what it is that you're doing now.
I'm unemployed. Enforced unemployment. I've started a project on Instagram, which is called Body of Work, which basically is sort of it's using the techniques, my knowledge of 20 years in the fashion industry, to sort of serve it back to itself. It's a nudes project, so it's got no clothes in it, and it's sort of part of what I wanted to say, actually, not that I'm fighting the cause for the middle-class white women, but middle-class white women are so caught up in the maelstrom of marketing and advertising that they have no empathy, because they are gaslit so badly about their body image. And that's kind of my thing, is about body image, is like if they could look outside of themselves, they'd have far more empathy and be far more inclusion. However, they are bled dry for beauty, fashion, all of this sort of stuff. They don't have any room for empathy, and I think that's why trying to get white women to like them. I know this sounds bad, but trying to get white women to like themselves a bit more would give them more room to love other people.
And where does ageing come into that?
Well, I'm 43. And it's that thing where you think it's a cliche, you go, oh, post-40 women become invisible. And I'm saying, yeah, whatever. Obviously, when you become 40, that happens. And all I need to say as someone, and I try not to make the news that I put on Instagram sexy. It's the antithesis of that. It's trying to show the sort of lift the curtain on celebrity and fashion photography, and putting a vaguely average body in it, post-baby cesarean body, and saying, this is what a celebrity photo would look like with all the tricks, but there's no retouch, no diet, no exercise, and no clothes. And recently I've just been saying, and I will be seen. And actually, because weirdly, Instagram is mostly, focused, and most industries are mostly focused on young people, whereas I don't feel like an old person, but I'm like, wow. You look around this sort of general swathe of advertising is not for me. And I'm only 43, and I'm like, wow, I've been retired already. You know, even though I've been retired by society, because now I'm in my motherhood phase, so I'm no longer a consumer the way that I would have been before. It's amazing the feedback that I get for women just saying thank you, because I feel like you being seen is enabling me to be seen. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's my vehicle now.
Thank you. Right, this lady.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Clara made about how there's an effort to be more inclusive in campaigns, but it doesn't necessarily translate to like e-commerce, because I've worked a lot on e-commerce, and I'm particularly looking now, like in a research point of view, at how that translates maybe for like pride collections and things like that, which is very flashy and it's very easy to put in a campaign, but then it's always quite frustrating when you don't really see you don't see any effort or any connection between those bigger images and those bigger campaigns and the actual day-to-day reality of like if you're trying to purchase something from an e-com website. So what do you think is the role that e-commerce is playing now? What do you think, how can we make it better?
A child growing up with disabilities or wheelchair user or difference, they should be seeing themselves represented. They should be seeing themselves up there in lights. They deserve to be, and they should feel as though they count and that they can achieve something. By not having those models that would represent that person, you are damaging the new generation of people. They already, we're talking about what Grace was just saying about women of a certain age feeling invisible, but then you're doing that to a whole generation of people who are coming up with disabilities. And I just think it's really important that these e-commerce sites, as much as they want to hire you, they do the pay posts and say, oh yeah, we want you to build our campaign on Instagram and blah, 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 blah. And that's all great. And then, sometimes you actually go one further and they actually have you in for some of their stuff on their websites. But then their core, once they're finished, just like the Pride, it's gone. And they use their regular models to highlight the Pride month, showing off all the Pride fashion. But I didn't see any transgender, non-binary models or anything like that.
Has anyone put together a site that is aimed at the adaptive clothing market?
Yes, there are sites out there. Unfortunately,
and are they well curated?
There are brands that they have adaptive clothing. The problem with adaptive clothing, I personally don't really wear adaptive clothing, but that's because it's down to style. I like to feel like I look stylish, and thank you. But what a lot of the brands are not doing stylish adaptive wear. And then when they do adaptive wear, it's like, you're not even, like M&S did it. I don't even know if people knew that they did adaptive clothing. They did. Because they stopped this year. Yeah. No, but that's exactly it. Yeah. I'm actually still waiting for an answer from them. They've not given me an answer.
Has your agency thought about asking you to go in to give advice to brands about how to make... It seems really obvious to me sitting here that this is a huge business opportunity. They're missing a trick.
No, but I think I might have to work with
Arif.
you. I think we're going to have to team up, because I think on a tag team we can make a real change. But no, they haven't. It's something that they've they have been trying to tackle themselves. Being a new, they're only like coming up to 3 years old, the agency, so they are literally trying to break down stereotypes every single day. They are, and you know, they also take on trans women, right? So, holla. Okay, it's not just it's models with disabilities, differences, and different types of sexual orientation. Okay, so, okay, I give you the details after, most definitely. But and actually they're actually looking because they haven't got enough. So yeah, definitely. But we do. Sorry. But this is one of the things that you know, that we are trying to work hard, and we're trying to break down the stereotypes, and we are trying that the e-commerce sites, the high street shops, kind of just take us on, and because our money is valuable just like everybody else's.
Because it doesn't seem that casting's enough. It seems to me that they should be, that the questions is also about because as you know, every time I've seen you're in a great outfit, and you're not being, you know, you're probably having to do serious editing to choose pieces that can work with you in the wheelchair. So why aren't, that expertise is a stylist, that expertise could be hired. And I'm definitely going to be emailing Zebedee and saying I think that that's another way of them including what you could be doing as a consultant.
Yeah, I think they're literally probably still trying to work through this minefield. They get doors closed in their face so much. Just trying to get meetings with people and for them to even sit down in the same room as them. It's difficult. Even that as well, it's really difficult. I mean, they've asked, like, in terms of like certain campaigns that they want to do, and they've said to me, oh, you know, like, do you know anyone that can help with this? Or, you know, and I've given them details and I've put them in contact with certain people. So but then that's through what I've been doing myself. You know, they do have a lot of models and they are trying to represent everybody, but they need help. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, if we could go, we'll do the questions 1, 2, 3. So there's Ben. Hi.
My question's looking around the room, like, how do we stop preaching to the choir?
I hear you.
Yeah, because I work for like
I hear you.
a cultural consultancy where everyone's identifies as a minority of some sort, and all the work that we put out is made by minorities of some sort. But the audience we speak to are already a little bit woke or whatever. But we've got this thing, like, we were going to put this event on, and we contemplated like antagonising the issue and saying, right, we're going to do a price reduction on tickets for people called Dan and Tom. And one of the girls went, it's called the pay gap, babes. But like, that's the thing, like, how do we actually stop preaching to the choir?
I mean, I guess that's one of the biggest things, is that we do speak to ourselves a lot. And I think one of the problems at the moment is that we haven't got a lot of monologues and not a lot of dialogue going on. I think this is the really dangerous moment that we've got in this period of time, that we are so polarised and fractured that we have a fear of speaking to people or groups who we might not necessarily connect with or want to connect with. And I think it's important to we might have to think outside that box in order to get there. You know, there was a really good example is, I know it's going to go, Jermaine's got an historical tip, but a really good example is Fred Hampton, who was a leader of the Black Panther movement. He was a famous one. One of the things that people forget about Fred Hampton, that he spoke to all groups of people, because he said, well, actually, these other people who, you know, were white and of low working income had marginalised problems as well, which we should talk about. And if we talk about all these problems, we're probably going to find that our problems are pretty similar economically. And then actually, if we talk, then maybe we could sift through the problems and think about the real problems involved. So for me, I think it's really important and that's why I like John Harris as a journalist, because I think he's really good at going out and talking to different groups of people. across the board and asking real questions instead of, which I think is the other problem with social media, the echo chamber, which I think's actually a real problem at the moment. So, I think how we do that is we're going to have to basically really come out of our comfort zones to some extent.
I agree with that one. Of late, I've been shadow banned by Instagram a few times in the past 2 weeks, and it's kind of quite annoying actually, because, how dare you try and tell me what is what do they say? They said the promotion of something that is not desirable.
Oh, they did that to us the last 2 days. They've done that to us the last 2 days.
Seriously? It's out of order. And who are these people that can say that what I'm, like a photo that I've put up and what I'm saying is I'm promoting undesirable or undesirability? It's
nipples.
Just ridiculous.
Just talk about nipples for something that's undesirable.
It's just,
but it's also to do with
absolutely ridiculous.
The algorithm, which is but it's a real problem because you're basically, what you've got are people working off a system, the stats, which is another big problem in society, that basically, instead of actually some human interaction, people are just working from stats and numbers, and that's a problem. That's a part of marketing. That is a part of branding. That is a part of advertising. So, that's what I'm saying. These things are very nuanced and complicated, and are stopping people from having human interaction, like today, human interaction and talking, and having a dialogue.
Just wanted to say, because something you touched on, going back to the stop preaching to the choir thing, and I think you said, we all have to become uncomfortable. I got approached, and I talked to Caryn about it, by doing and they obviously had no idea who I was or what I talk about, because I got approached by Primark to talk on a panel about mums. And I clearly talk about sustainability all the time. And I said to Caryn, I was like, do I do this to go and be, just basically, it's the only way you can be provocative. The only way you can really do it is by changing it from the inside. And I was just like, this is really against everything I believe in. But I would have made a massive difference if I'd got on the panel. I think somebody was suddenly clicked and sat there and said, great, mothers, whatever, but however, what we're talking about, is intersectional feminism with the way that you are making your clothes, blah, 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 blah. I would have had to have been, really have had to put myself in a role that was deeply uncomfortable. And I think it is as simple as moving out of comfort zones, doing things that kind of feel the antithesis of our morals to go and make the changes.
Yeah, because that's why I'm thinking about, the whole panel for you said about, why should I be here, white middle class female? Why remove the white middle class female? Just add more people. It's kind of simple, really. I find it really weird.
Inclusion works
There's
in every
a weird thing about inclusion, but there's a lot of stuff going on I'm noticing at the moment. It's not inclusive. It's becoming reductionist, which is is the problem. And then you go back to speaking to the converted. So you're going to have to be prepared to speak to people who you may not feel that you want to speak to. Because actually you're not. Because also then we have to take the position of our own judgments. Because we do have our own judgments. Anyone say they don't have judgments is a lie, basically. Because you have subconscious judgments, preconceived notions. I would have that when I was younger, basically going, I'm not going into that area because you know what? Those people are like that. Might be a bit dodgy. Actually, no. Actually, what I did and what I need to be doing is talking to these people and making them understand, actually, your view of me isn't correct, and because of that, and my dad, black, was actually pretty prejudiced as well, for particular reasons. And then, he became friends with some, and then, he realised, well, actually, I was a bit wrong about that. That person, not everybody is this grand narrative. And that's, I think, the problem at the moment. We have massive grand narratives. We like to categorise people. I understand why categorisation has happened and why there are groups, it's the sense of, Serena Williams, saying, why can't I just be a great tennis player instead of a great female tennis player? The sense of, in relation to what you were saying before, and I understand where you're coming from with that, actually I'd like to be picked. I know there's the thing of where we need those spaces, but I want to be picked because I'm actually really good, rather than just, I'm black, so I'm going to be put in that, allowed to have that job, which is the ultimate goal at the end of the day. What we're talking about is basically to be accepted for... Difference isn't a problem. Difference is just something that is and doesn't matter.
Can I add to that, though? Me being black and in a space is just as important. So yes, I'm glad to be in a space and be black. But the reason why I said that is because what you don't want is to be in a space and second guessing yourself of why you've been picked to be in that space as like a token person. So me being black, that's just as important.
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that basically the ultimate goal is the position of basically... somebody's, it'd be like, Steve McQueen, he's a great black artist.
Just to posit back to what Ben said, what would it look like if the Daily Mail, which is one of the most widely read online platforms, which I read every day because I want to know what they're saying, if that didn't have the narratives it had, that to me would feel like real change. I'm not talking about the politics, I'm talking about the conversation and the way those conversations are nuanced. I think that, for me, would feel like we've broken the echo chamber.
Would you have to speak to a Daily Mail reader to make that change?
Yeah.
We launched our Brexit report with the Mail on Sunday, and I did that on purpose. We had no backing. 3 of us wrote it. Sally, who's here, did the design, and they were a Remain paper. The Remain editor's gone to the Mail on Sunday. And I made a decision based on the fact that I wanted them to understand an industry that they think is just ridiculous.
Did you read the comment section?
I read the comment section. When I was trolled, I read the comment section, and I read it every single day because I want to know how bad it is so that then I can understand the temperature and how it's changing.
That's great.
And I think we have to, but we're not always able to emotionally. So I think that I hear you about echo chambers. I'm very proud of everybody that's come in this room. It's not as easy for us to run these events. I'm being honest, it isn't as it is other things because people they're either, I don't know, they shut off of all backgrounds. I've seen it.
But I have to say
I think it's so important that the APPG owns this because then it's going through Parliament and then it's going through cross-party and then the APPG runs on every political party being involved. So that's why I think it becomes important. It doesn't mean I've got the hotline to whoever's in number 10, but it does mean that they will read that report. They will have to hear us because we are there. I think that's the way that I can promote this. We do need to go to this question, this lady in the shawl, and then here, and then I think we need to end and you can have a drink.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I just want to say thank you so much for this event. It's been really wonderful and super inspiring. But I do want to ask how we, and this is actually leading from Caryn, because how do we, I don't know, how do we tackle that white male gaze in how we construct and use women's bodies now in media? Because I see that, especially on Instagram, there's lots of new agents, but I still feel it's very much through the white male gaze. And I'm just wondering, how do we change that? Because it's something that's so, fashion absorbs everything, and it sort of can take ownership of so much. But how do we take ownership and sort of be our own agents? And how do we kind of execute that agency? What would it look like? Because I don't know. I keep thinking, how do you photograph a woman's body? You know, and it can look different. Because going back to Serena Williams and the cover on your Instagram, where she's sort of photographed from the back and it's it's untouched. But still, there's still something about the sort of the black woman's back, going back to many photographs, even Kim Kardashian's most recent soiree with the, champagne. So how do we take that ownership and what does it look like? I don't know. I have no idea, and I'd like to know if there's anyone here that knows what that would look like.
You go.
I decided to embrace my curve. I was going for casting and I was being rejected, and I was like, that's it. I'm going to embrace it. I'm a black woman. I love whenever I see a curvy woman, it's beautiful. I think that is what, we should be inclusive. Yes, skinny women are also women as well. But for me, I think for my femininity, I know many people will say I am portraying the patriarchal definition of what a woman is, because it's one of the problem I have when I go for casting. They don't pick me because I'm too cis-looking, I'm too feminine, I'm too womanly. They don't like that. They wanted me to look more androgynous or not look too feminine. So for me, I embrace it because I think that a woman's body, if the woman is not being exploited and she feels comfortable, it's the same with sex work. If she feels comfortable with it, then she should do it. So far, she's not being exploited. She wants to show off the body, the curves, the cellulite, go for it and enjoy it. I think it would be hard to not sexualize it. We will have to brainwash all straight cis men to how? Take the brain out and how give them a lobotomy and clean the brain and make them not to look at us sexually.
I slightly disagree with you on that.
Yeah, I have
I'm
to
going to
disagree with you on the
you.
sex work
but
thing
the
as
point-
well. Sorry, as a feminist, I have to disagree on that one.
Can I make a comment?
Let me just make my point,
man?
please. You
Am I
disagree.
allowed?
Can I ask what you disagree with? The sex work.
Sex work is never consensual.
For me-
Anybody who's a prostitute is in
Well,
a
I'm sorry, I won't
slave
use the
trade.
word prostitute, but sex work is work. And for many people who come from my background, black, transgender woman, I don't do it, but I will speak out for them because I feel that that is the only option we have to survive. For us to, when we're being kicked out of our family home, walking down the street being harassed, no one will give us a job. Nobody in our community wants to take us in. We're homeless. Healthcare, we have disparities. We have so much against us. The only thing we have to turn to is sex work. And for me, I believe that a woman who decides to go and sleep with someone for sex or do act porn or do whatever they want to do, it is their body. You don't have to agree with it because I never agreed with it in the past as well. I used to feel like, oh, it's wrong because of where I come from. But I had to educate myself. I have to educate myself. So back to what you were saying, a black naked woman would always be sexualized, no matter how you portray it, no matter how much you try to tone it down, they will always sexualize it. That has to do with the men who find it attractive. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay.
I mean, can I add to this?
Can I just say that I'm a photographer, and 85%, to change the male gaze, you need to have more female photographers.
Yes.
And
you need to stand up for this. I have a feeling this might happen.
And 85% of the people coming out of university now are women. Only 15% are men. Yet 85% of the work goes to men and not to women. And we're also paid less than the men. So you have to change the male gaze. You have to employ more women photographers.
And you also, and adding to that, that basically, if you think about it, if you want to, the attitude is, why do you have to have one kind of body? Because that is the problematic that you have. Right. But when you basically position that you have this one thing, that's the ideal. Well, no, there are many different ideals, and they're all valid. If somebody is curvaceous, that's valid. If someone is... Because what society tends to do, and going back to what Caryn was saying, that we present this dominant single narrative of what a human being is or a person. And the point is, as a narrative, that's not true. People are... There's no such thing as good or bad. There's a bit of good and bad in every one of us. No, that's the whole point of trying to broaden the spectrum of aesthetics, basically. And that's that's basically what the battle is. Yeah. A battle of a singular aesthetic,
Agree. Right, this is our last question, and then we can have a drink.
Thank you.
And none of this is easy, and none of this is, I think the solutions are in this room, but I think we're away from, I hope that you will take our survey because that will only help us to get this work done. But this is never going to be done.
I think I just wanted to touch on and ask if we also have a responsibility to meet the industry the other direction. We want them to listen to us.
Yeah.
from my consulting work, diversity and branding that I've done, what I've come to learn is that there is a huge financial cost of becoming a more diverse brand. So some of the action points that I've asked them to implicate is stop pinning size 8 clothes onto mannequins. That's one of my first things. The uniform issue for me is a huge bugbear. Sample sizes to send out to stylists, to send out to magazines, all the rest of it. All of this comes at an enormous cost. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. So it's not necessarily that brands aren't wanting to do it. It might be that they actually can't do it, especially in this economic climate. Everybody's.
I don't believe that. I'm running a tiny brand and we're managing to do it.
It would be easy on a tiny brand. But
well, no, not necessarily, because there's not the finances behind it. But because it's where you have to ethically. Most big businesses will say we don't have to be ethical because it's business and bottom line is our god.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's interesting to try and understand the mechanics of what is stopping this progress.
Because the sizing when Caryn was a stylist would have been, I think, a size bigger than the sizing of, say, 7 years ago, right, when I was styling for XYZ, because the sizing's gotten smaller. The girls have gotten smaller.
It's also it costs less to make them smaller.
So it'll cost more to make them bigger. So if we want a bigger sample sizes, then it's going to cost them more. If they're looking at their bottom line.
But that's what I've been saying on this panel. It's like it's a capitalist thing. It's not a moralistic thing, and I think that's what everyone's been saying. If you asked for the milk of human kindness in business, they don't go together. So is it something that has to be enforced by law, which is kind of what you're saying?
If you're going to sale in November instead of January, or you're going to sale in June instead of August, it's already not working. The whole system isn't working, which is another conversation about the flaws of a system that's a runaway juggernaut. Because it didn't go to sale in June or in November when I was a kid, and now it does. So they're building in the waste factors. So I think they can make the clothes a little bit bigger if they're already going to sell and they're having to price those margins in.
But it's not they're selling them to, because like Arif said, like there are, and in fashion particularly, like the women who have money tend to be older, and by dint of that, they are larger.
I mean,
yes, it's going to cost a bit more money to do the samples, but the opportunity to make money.
I'm totally on your side. Like I'm not.
No, I'd rather look like Christy Turlington, thank you very much, than say a 16-year-old girl. I mean, Christy Turlington's probably got more opportunity to convert her being used on an image into sale.
And so the whole thing comes down to education.
I don't think so. I'm sorry, like the
You don't?
teenage market,
I totally
Boohoo,
think so.
Very,
but not in
all of those
stores
online,
like
they
Marks
are
and
pumping
Spencer's.
billions of pounds out of people. Christy Turlington would not pump that amount.
I don't know, because one piece of, it's price per garment though, isn't it?
That's it. How can you
Price per garment.
It's
price per garment.
Who sees Christy Turlington and thinks, maybe I will spend £700.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're going to buy that once, whereas the people are buying the fast fashion every week, every day.
So because I'm trying to work this out, so basically if the economics are there for, or let's say, a mature woman to be buying clothes, so then is it going beyond, if they can't see that, hang on, these are the numbers there, so what is it then? Is it more than economics? Is it something else going on? Is it something deeper ingrained?
Well,
and that's
I mean,
the
for
question.
example, so the response to my sort of irate letter to the CEO of Marks and Spencer's about the uniform is that they brought me in to discuss lingerie because lingerie has the budget to bring me in. And the lingerie listened, and now the lingerie department of Marks and Spencer's is now a happily quite diverse place. There doesn't seem to be any media over this. There doesn't seem to be anybody shouting about it. It's the first online, fully diverse anything that I've ever seen. And the reason that it's like that is because 2 years ago I pulled them up on it. I wrote a blog on it. I showed every online major retailer and the high street, all of them looking exactly the same. And I said, it's not good enough. And they've now changed. It's taken a couple of years. They have listened, but that's because the budget that they have is in lingerie, because that's one of their biggest selling markets. However, uniform at Marks and Spencer's is now falling quite rapidly after last year's success of, able-bodied, getting into clothes and stuff for, it was like the autistic spectrum, disabled children, all the rest of it. Fantastic. There was, a great, response to it. This year they ran a campaign saying all the wild things, and then there was a huge backlash because they were saying, but don't call our autistic children wild. It's like, no, we weren't talking about autistic children being wild. It was just a different campaign. But it must be so scary to come up with anything when it's all, everything is so kind of pushed back in your face, criticised, trolled, and I know they really do care about it. I've sat in huge conference rooms where these people are going, I don't want any bad comments. It's like, that's just asking me how they can avoid it. It's like, you can't avoid it. It's just going to happen.
Hire the people you're talking about in the boardroom.
Yeah, they need to, but in order to get in to talk to them about that, they need to have the budget. And in order for things to change, they would need to have the budget. They're not going to just be all hearts and minds about it. They do need the budget to start making the changes.
But they do have staff. They do employ people. I've worked on M&S campaigns.
They have the budget.
They have. They might.
They shouldn't be doing it.
But it will come.
But they also have team members, so it comes down to the structures of who they're hiring, which is the original point.
Yeah.
Sorry. In response to that.
Just hold it close.
Fred's on strike.
There we go. In response to that, I did do a fashion showcase for Tommy Hilfiger Adaptive this year.
Yeah.
And that was probably the only thing that I've done all year that was like absolutely inclusive. It was from the people that designed it all the way down to the models were people with disabilities. The person that did the promotion video was blind. Now you're thinking, how does that even work? But if you see the promotion video, you would see that it worked, yeah? And so it just goes to show that when you have the people involved that from the top go right down, that it, to produce the product, to showcase the product, for those people that you are speaking about in mind, it works. Now, the guy, he said that, that costs a lot of money, but they've already recouped that money.
Yeah, so that is the dream. It's how do we get to the dream?
So what
do you know what I mean?
It's not impossible, but it's not impossible.
It's very much possible.
It should have to be law. That is the only way it's going to be. People have to be forced to do it, and then it becomes natural. It's otherwise a behaviour. It's too much of foreign behaviour for them to want to adapt just for profit or
so in my
non-profit.
experience, laws change on social change. So I did quite a lot of work campaigning for the Advertising Standards Authority last year, and just kept coming back with the answer of we don't enforce change. We respond to change, even though I know that it's right to be more diverse. It doesn't matter that I know or that I care about it or that I made a petition about it. Society has to show them to then create change. So it's about making more and
That's
more
what
noise.
we're doing here tonight.
That's exactly what we're doing.
I need to round this up because I've got to get home. Have a drink. Talk to each other. Thank you very much.